love and silence. Humanity's smallest stood at the edge of the docking bay, watching the bustling activity of the station. Ships of all sizes moved in patterns that looked chaotic to the untrained eye but were perfectly organized to those who had worked here for years. The metallic clatter of loading drones and the low hum of engines filled the air, a constant reminder of the life that pulsed through this hub at the edge of known space. Elias, a human among many alien species, felt a strange calm. He did not speak much. He did not argue with anyone. He simply observed. That was his role, and he had come to understand that silence could reveal more than any loud proclamation. The station was a meeting point for representatives of countless civilizations. Some were tall and lithe, others small and armored. All of them had come with the expectation of demonstrating strength, of showing their power to the galaxy. Humans, on the other hand, were few in number, traveling in modest ships that drew little attention. Elias's own vessel was small, easy to overlook, but inside it contained advanced systems designed for study, not warfare. Many of the other species had already dismissed humans as insignificant. They did not know what humans were capable of. Elias had long accepted this. He knew that observation and quiet action often achieved more than loud words or flashy displays. While monitoring the station's communications, Elias noticed a signal buried deep beneath the routine traffic. At first he thought it was just interference, a glitch in the system, but as he examined it more closely, he realized it was something else entirely. The signal was subtle, almost imperceptible, and carried a pattern that did not match any known language or code. It seemed emotional, almost like a pulse of feeling rather than information. Elias's heart beat faster as he tried to understand it. No other species had reacted to it. They were blind to it. But humans, it seemed, had a way of sensing these things, of connecting to what others could not. He began tracing the signal back to its source, moving through layers of communication networks, each more complex than the last. The pulse grew stronger, yet remained quiet, almost shy in its insistence. It was as if it was calling out for someone to notice, and Elias realized with a thrill that it had chosen him. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. He was alone, surrounded by species that had no idea what he was discovering. If he shared it, they might dismiss it, or worse, they might react with fear. Many species in the coalition valued power over understanding, control over curiosity. Elias decided to keep his discovery secret, at least for now. He copied the signal's pattern and stored it in his portable device. He needed to study it to understand what it meant before revealing it to anyone else. As he worked, he felt the weight of silence around him. The station carried on as usual, unaware of the tiny anomaly that could change everything. The more he studied, the more he realized that the signal was not random. It was a cry for help, but not in the way any species would recognize. It was emotional, a trace of grief and longing that had been transmitted across light years. It was fragile, but it was there. Hours passed without notice. Elias moved from one observation post to another, tracing the signal and noting its subtle shifts. He began to notice patterns that resembled feelings humans knew well: loneliness, hope, fear, and the faintest hint of love. He was struck by the intensity of the emotions embedded in what others would see as a simple data stream. Humans could sense these patterns in ways that others could not, and that realization filled him with a quiet pride. Humanity, though small in numbers and overlooked by many, carried something unique. He felt a connection to the distant source of the signal, as if he were touching a life far beyond his reach. Meanwhile, the other representatives of the coalition were engaged in loud debates and displays of power. They discussed territorial disputes, trade agreements, and fleet movements, oblivious to the delicate message hiding in plain view. Elias had to remind himself not to become impatient with them. They did not know how to listen. Silence was a foreign concept to most of these civilizations. To them, action and noise were the signs of significance. Elias understood that sometimes the most important things required patience and quiet attention. As night fell on the station, though in space the concept was relative, Elias continued his work. He mapped the trajectory of the signal, trying to determine its origin. It appeared to come from a sector long abandoned, a place considered unimportant by all major species. The star systems there were old, the planets uninhabited, or so the records suggested. Elias felt a chill as he realized the signal had persisted for decades, perhaps centuries, unnoticed by everyone else. It had waited for someone capable of understanding, and now it had found him. Elias contacted a few trusted colleagues, fellow humans stationed elsewhere, to discreetly compare notes. They had noticed similar anomalies, but none had been able to trace them this far. Together, they began piecing together a map of these emotional signals, discovering that they formed a pattern across several star systems. It was as if the galaxy itself was quietly crying out, leaving subtle traces that only humans could feel. The thought was overwhelming, yet exhilarating. It suggested that humanity's presence, small and unassuming as it was, had a purpose beyond observation or survival. He decided to take a risk. Elias would attempt to respond to the signal. He did not know what effect it would have, but he felt certain that silence and understanding, rather than noise and force, would be the key. Using a combination of human intuition and the station's technology, he transmitted a simple, gentle pulse back toward the source. It carried no words, no commands, only the faintest echo of human feeling, acknowledgement, empathy, and quiet encouragement. The reaction was immediate and astonishing. The signal shifted, becoming more complex, more coherent. It was as if the distant source recognized him, recognized humanity in some fundamental way. Elias felt a thrill of fear and hope. If other species discovered what he had done, they might misunderstand it. They might see it as a tool, a weapon, or a threat. He had to be careful. Yet the very act of connection was undeniable. Something alive, something feeling, had responded to him across the vastness of space. For days, Elias monitored the responses, noting subtle changes in the signal. Each adjustment seemed to convey a new aspect of emotion, a piece of a story he could not yet fully comprehend. He realized that the source of the signal was intelligent, capable of thought, but its mind operated differently from any species in the coalition. It communicated not through words, but through the resonance of feeling. Humans could interpret it. Other species could not. This realization reinforced the fragile but profound significance of humanity in the galaxy. Elias's work began to attract attention from a few curious allies, human and alien alike, who were intrigued by his unusual methods. They approached him cautiously, questioning his motives. Elias remained quiet, explaining only that he had discovered something extraordinary that required careful study. Some were skeptical, others curious, and a few were frightened. Fear, he understood, was a common reaction to the unknown, especially when it defied conventional expectations. As the signal continued to pulse, Elias sensed that he was at the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything the Coalition thought it knew about life, communication, and power. He felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The station around him seemed smaller now, the bustling activity less important compared to the delicate thread of emotion stretching across the void. It was a thread only humanity could follow, a subtle yet unstoppable force. One evening, while Elias was alone in the observation deck, he reflected on what he had learned. Power, he realized, was not always about fleets, weapons, or alliances. Sometimes the smallest acts, the quietest attentions could reach where armies never could. Love, empathy, and understanding, these were forces that could ripple across galaxies, unseen but profoundly effective. The thought gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Humanity, though small and often overlooked, had a role that no one else could fulfill. Elias continued to refine his responses to the signal, experimenting with timing, tone, and pattern. He discovered that subtle variations could elicit strong reactions, that the distant source seemed to anticipate and mirror his emotions. It was as if a conversation were taking place across light years, without words or sound. The complexity of it amazed him. Each pulse, each resonance, revealed more about the beings sending them, and more about humanity's unique ability to connect. He felt a growing bond, not with a person, but with a distant consciousness reaching toward him in trust. As word of strange anomalies began to circulate quietly through the coalition, Elias felt the first stirrings of tension. Leaders noticed unusual readings, but none could explain them. Some suspected sabotage, others feared a weapon. Only Elias understood the truth. It was neither weapon nor attack, but a call for recognition, an invitation to connect. He realized the delicate balance of secrecy and revelation he would need to maintain. Too much attention could destroy the fragile communication he had established. He resolved to protect it at all costs. The days turned into weeks. Elias grew accustomed to the rhythm of the signal, learning to anticipate its shifts, to respond before it fully revealed its intentions. He began documenting everything, creating a detailed record for future generations. He knew that what he was experiencing was rare, perhaps unprecedented. Humanity had discovered a way to touch life across the stars in a way no other species could. It was a silent, unseen power, yet its implications were vast. It could alter politics, alliances, and the very understanding of intelligence and emotion. Elias never tired of watching the signal respond. Each pulse was a message, each echo a story, and though he did not know where it would lead, he felt certain that humanity's role in the galaxy was only beginning. Small as they were, humans had something profound to offer, the ability to understand and connect, quietly and without demand. It was a power invisible to most, but unstoppable to those who recognized it. And so in the vast silence of space, surrounded by species that measured strength by noise and numbers, Elias listened. He responded with care, with thought, with the subtle force that humans carried in their hearts. The galaxy may have underestimated them, but that would not matter. Sometimes the smallest voice, the quietest presence, could carry the greatest weight. Elias understood this now, and he knew that the signal had chosen the right species to answer it. Humanity's journey had begun, and it would unfold not with war or clamor, but with the quiet persistence of attention, care, and silent love. Mara sat quietly at her station, her eyes scanning rows of blinking lights and streaming data. The hum of the space station surrounded her, a constant companion, but her focus was on something far more subtle. Among the endless streams of technical information, she sensed a pattern that others missed, a faint pulse, a whisper of feeling embedded in the signals that moved through the station's network. Most beings would have ignored it. Most had. But Mara had learned to listen. She leaned closer to her console, tracing the pulse across multiple channels. At first it seemed insignificant, like a faint echo of a conversation long forgotten. But as she followed it, she realized it was alive in a strange way, as if it carried emotions rather than words. Loneliness, fear, and a hint of longing flowed through the signal. Mara's heart quickened. She was not the only one noticing it, but she was the first to understand that this was not random interference. It was something else, entirely. Mara had always been observant. Among humans, some noticed things others overlooked. And among aliens, she was even more exceptional because humans could detect subtleties that others could not. This signal was one of those subtleties. It was fragile, delicate, yet persistent, carrying a story of something that had been forgotten over time. She could not name it yet, but she felt it in a way that was unmistakable. This was a message sent across unimaginable distances seeking recognition. She began to map its trajectory, moving through layers of encrypted transmissions and secure channels. Every path she traced revealed more about the source. The signal seemed to come from a region long considered unimportant, a cluster of star systems where ancient civilizations had once thrived. Most of the Coalition had abandoned this area, labeling it quiet and uneventful. Mara's pulse quickened as she realized the significance. What others had dismissed as silence was actually a cry for connection, a longing reaching across light years. Mara worked through the cycle of station shifts, alone for hours at a time. Her colleagues had noticed her interest but did not understand it. Aliens came to her desk occasionally offering suggestions, but she dismissed them quietly. They were too focused on numbers, coordinates, and strategy. Mara focused on what could not be measured. She traced the faint resonance, noting subtle changes that seemed to respond to her presence, almost as if the signal sensed her understanding. The signal began to intensify, though no one else noticed. Lights flickered in distant parts of the station, systems reacted unpredictably, and minor failures spread without explanation. The Coalition leaders were confused, calling for technical assessments. Mara observed silently, recording everything. The anomalies corresponded precisely with the emotional pulses she had been tracking. It became clear that this was not a malfunction, but a response to the signal itself, something that only humans could sense. The thought filled her with both excitement and unease. She decided to test her hypothesis. Using her station's communication systems, Mara sent a controlled pulse back along the signal's path. She did not know if it would be recognized, but she hoped it would convey understanding. The response was subtle at first, a shift in rhythm, a new layer of resonance. She smiled quietly. It worked. The distant source had registered her attempt at contact, responding with an emotional pattern that was coherent for the first time in decades. It was more than she could have imagined. She realized that humans could communicate in ways others could not, reaching life that had been abandoned, forgotten, or overlooked. Mara began coordinating with other human specialists, sharing her findings in discrete channels. Each of them contributed observations from different sectors of the galaxy, mapping similar emotional pulses. Together, they started building a pattern, a network of signals that formed a fragile web across uncharted space. These were not messages in the traditional sense, but traces of feeling, resonances that had persisted despite time and distance. Humans were uniquely capable of interpreting them. Other species had no equivalent. Tension began to build on the station. Coalition leaders noticed that systems were reacting unpredictably and demanded answers. Some accused Mara of tampering with communications. Others suspected sabotage. She remained quiet, offering no explanations that could alarm them. She understood that revealing too much too soon would be dangerous. The signal had to remain protected until they fully understood it. Too many species would react with fear or aggression if they knew the truth. Humans, however, could approach it with patience and care. Late at night, Mara often paused to observe the station from the observation deck. Stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass, each a sun for some distant world. The signal, she realized, came from one of these forgotten systems. It was alive, carrying remnants of consciousness and memory. The idea that emotion could traverse space in such a tangible form amazed her. This was more than communication, it was connection. A civilization long silenced, speaking through subtle resonance, reaching out to anyone who could understand. She began to notice changes in her own perception. Listening to the signal required stillness and patience. She found herself noticing details others missed. A flicker of light in the corridors, a rhythm in the engine hum, a shift in alien conversations. Humans had the ability to detect what was hidden, to sense what others ignored. And in this moment, that ability was proving essential. The signal began to reveal more complex patterns. Mara could detect sequences that suggested memory, thought, and emotion intertwined. She tried to respond carefully, matching the rhythm and resonance she detected. Each attempt yielded a response, subtle but unmistakable. The distant source seemed to recognize not only her actions but her intentions. It was a conversation without words, a dialogue of feeling that transcended language, culture, and species. Mara realized that the coalition would eventually notice the human response. Some species might react with skepticism, others with fear. Humans, however, approached it with care and understanding, a combination that could calm tension and foster trust. Mara felt the responsibility weigh heavily. She knew that the smallest error could disrupt the fragile connection, yet she also understood the magnitude of the opportunity. Humanity had been given a role that no other species could fulfill, to bridge the silence and reach what others could not. As days passed, the pulse of the signal became stronger and more coherent. It carried what Mara could only describe as a narrative, a story of a civilization that had long forgotten how to express feeling. Humans were rediscovering what the galaxy had lost. Each pulse revealed more about the beings who had sent it, their experiences, their regrets, their faintest joys. Mara felt a profound empathy. She realized that the human ability to feel deeply and act with subtle care was their greatest strength. Other species measured power by conquest and display, but humans measured it by understanding and connection. Mara began to anticipate shifts in the signal before they happened, responding with gentle, calculated pulses. She developed a rhythm, a pattern of interaction that seemed to satisfy the distant source. It was as if she had found the key to awakening a long, slumbering consciousness. The station around her carried on as usual, unaware that a conversation spanning light years was taking place right under its roof. Mara found satisfaction in this quiet work. She did not seek recognition or reward. The act itself, the connection, was enough. Other humans working in remote sectors began noticing similar patterns. They reported minor anomalies in their systems that coincided with the pulses Mara had identified. Slowly, a network of understanding formed. Humans shared techniques, observations, and strategies in secret channels, building a map of the emotional signals across the galaxy. They realized that the phenomena were far more widespread than anyone had imagined. Humanity's capacity for subtle perception and response was becoming apparent, quietly shaping events in ways no one else understood. Mara continued to refine the interaction. She discovered that certain sequences evoked stronger responses than others. She experimented carefully, always mindful not to overwhelm the source. Each success filled her with quiet satisfaction. The distant civilization was responding, opening itself in ways that no one else could have prompted. Mara knew that what she was witnessing was unprecedented. A species long silenced was beginning to communicate again, not with weapons or politics, but with feeling. Humanity's quiet approach had made this possible. The coalition leaders began to grow suspicious of the strange patterns appearing in the systems. Some demanded explanations, others threatened action. Mara remained calm, offering only minimal information. She understood that any misstep could trigger panic. The signal was fragile, the connection delicate. Humanity's role was to nurture it, not to expose it to forces that could destroy it. She took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythm of the pulse, the tiny variations that carried meaning. It was enough. As the station cycled through days and nights, Mara reflected on the lessons she had learned. Strength was not always measured by force or size. Sometimes the smallest actions, the quietest attentions had the most impact. Humans, though few and often underestimated, had a unique capacity for understanding. They could listen when others ignored, respond when others acted, and care when others dismissed. The pulse of the distant civilization had chosen them for a reason. Mara felt a quiet pride, a recognition of humanity's subtle power. Mara spent long hours observing the changes in the signal. It became clear that the civilization was awakening emotionally, rediscovering feelings long buried. Loneliness and grief transformed into cautious hope. The faint echoes of joy began to appear. Mara's careful guidance had coaxed them out of silence. She felt a deep connection, not with individuals but with a species across the stars. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating. Humanity had a role in the galaxy that no one else could fulfill. The signal continued to evolve. Each pulse carried more emotion, more depth. Mara responded with the same care, her actions deliberate and thoughtful. The conversation without words deepened, forming a link that spanned light years. Other species remained unaware, focused on politics, strategy, and displays of power. Mara understood that their ignorance was both a challenge and a gift. She had time to nurture the connection before it could be disrupted. In the quiet hours at the station, Mara often paused to reflect. She thought about the civilization sending the signal, the long journey it had taken, and the care required to reach it. She thought about humanity's role, small but significant, quiet but powerful. The galaxy was vast, full of noise and ambition, but it was the small, subtle actions that could reach the deepest places. Mara smiled softly, knowing that she was part of something extraordinary. Humanity's quiet strength was beginning to shine, and it would change everything in ways no one yet understood. Talon had observed many species in his long service with the Coalition. He had watched wars begin with proud speeches and end with broken worlds. He had seen alliances formed through fear and shattered by ambition, yet the humans confused him. They arrived quietly, spoke little, and showed no hunger for dominance. At first he thought this meant weakness. Over time he began to suspect it meant something far more dangerous and far more powerful. Talon worked as a cultural observer, assigned to study new species and report their behavior to the Coalition Council. His body was tall and narrow, his skin pale and smooth, his eyes capable of seeing small changes in movement and light. He noticed patterns others missed, which was why he had started watching the humans more closely. They did not behave like the others. They paused where others rushed. They listened where others argued. They seemed to care about things that had no clear value. He first noticed it during a minor systems failure on the station. Alarms sounded briefly, and many species reacted with panic or anger. Humans reacted differently. Instead of shouting orders, they checked on each other. One human placed a hand on another's shoulder. Another sat beside a frightened worker until the alarm stopped. There was no command, no reward, just quiet presence. Talon felt unsettled by this. He could not measure it, yet it clearly changed the atmosphere. Soon after, strange reports began spreading through internal channels. Systems were responding in unexpected ways. Old networks activated without command. Data streams shifted rhythm, as if something unseen was influencing them. The council demanded explanations, but none were satisfying. Talon noticed that many of these events occurred near human work zones. This was not coincidence. He decided to observe more closely. He followed a human technician named Irene during several work cycles. Irene rarely spoke unless necessary. She spent long hours monitoring signals that most ignored. Talon noticed that when she focused on her console, the strange system fluctuations stabilized. When she left, instability returned. This disturbed him deeply. No species should affect machines simply by attention, and yet it was happening. Talon reviewed archived data and found similar patterns linked to humans across multiple stations. Emotional spikes among humans often matched system corrections. Stress among humans sometimes caused small disruptions, while calm focus restored balance. It was as if the systems were responding to the emotional state of the humans themselves. This idea challenged everything Talon believed about technology and control. As he dug deeper, Talon uncovered fragments of encrypted human communication. He was not meant to access them, but curiosity drove him. What he found was not military planning or political schemes. It was discussion about signals, feelings, resonance, and care. Humans were mapping emotional patterns across space. They were not trying to control them. They were trying to understand them. This realization unsettled Talon more than any threat ever had. The Coalition believed emotion was a weakness, something to be controlled or removed. Humans treated it as a tool for connection. They did not suppress it, they refined it. They used it gently, without force. Talon began to wonder if the Coalition had made a grave mistake in underestimating them. On cycle, Talon witnessed something that changed him forever. A distant outpost lost contact without warning. Panic spread quickly. Fleets prepared to respond, assuming attack or rebellion. Humans responded differently. They slowed down communications, reduced noise, and sent simple, steady pulses through the network. No demands. No threats, just calm presence. It's passed. Then hours. Slowly, the outpost systems reactivated. Contact was restored. The humans said little afterward. When asked how they fixed it, they simply said they listened. Talon did not understand how listening could repair machines, but the evidence was undeniable. Something had answered them. Talon began to sense something else as well. A background presence, faint but growing stronger. It was not sound or light. It was feeling. Even he, not human, could detect it now that he knew what to look for. It carried sadness, age, and deep exhaustion. It felt like a civilization that had waited too long to be heard. The council dismissed Talon's concerns when he presented his findings. They accused him of being influenced by human sentiment. They warned him not to pursue emotional theories further. Talon complied publicly, but privately he continued his research. He knew that ignoring this would be dangerous. The systems were changing. The galaxy was responding to something ancient and powerful. He approached a human diplomat named Lysa, choosing his words carefully. He did not accuse or threaten. He simply asked why humans listened when others commanded. Lysa looked at him for a long moment before answering. She said humans learned long ago that silence often held more truth than noise. She said listening did not mean surrender. It meant respect. Those words stayed with Talon. Respect was not a concept widely valued in the Coalition. Fear and control were easier. Yet the humans seemed to inspire cooperation without force. Systems responded. Distant signals grew clearer. Stability returned where chaos had been expected. As weeks passed, the background presence grew stronger. Even non-humans began to notice effects they could not explain. Navigation errors increased. Ancient systems activated without instruction. The Coalition grew nervous. Some leaders suggested destroying old networks entirely. Humans quietly opposed this, urging patience. Talon realized with alarm that if the Coalition acted rashly, they might destroy something irreplaceable. Talon reviewed long-forgotten archives from extinct civilizations. He found references to emotional resonance networks, systems built not to obey commands but to respond to shared feeling. These civilizations had collapsed when emotion was suppressed in favor of control. Their technology had fallen silent because no one remembered how to speak to it. The truth became clear. The galaxy itself had been built, in part, on emotional connection. Humanity had not created this force. They had remembered it. Talon felt fear then, not of humans, but of his own people. The Coalition stood on the edge of repeating an ancient mistake. They believed power came from dominance. They did not understand that some systems could only be guided through empathy. He began secretly assisting the humans, redirecting attention away from their work and altering reports to delay council interference. It was a risk, but he believed it was necessary. Each day, the background signal grew more complex. It was waking up. And when it fully woke, it would remember how it had been treated. Talon watched as humans continued their quiet work. They did not celebrate their successes. They did not claim authority. They simply continued to listen, to respond, and to care. Their restraint impressed him more than any fleet ever had. One cycle, the signal shifted sharply. Systems across the station trembled. Emergency protocols activated. Panic spread. The council demanded immediate action. Humans went still. They lowered all unnecessary transmissions and focused inward. Talon felt the presence surge, then stabilize. The crisis passed without violence. No damage was done. But the warning was clear. Something vast was awakening, and only humans seemed able to guide it safely. Talon looked out at the stars and felt small for the first time in his long life. Not because humanity threatened him, but because they reminded him how little control truly mattered. The smallest force, applied with care, could shape entire worlds. He understood now why the humans were dangerous in the most unexpected way. They did not seek to rule the galaxy. They sought to understand it. And in doing so, they were becoming the only ones capable of holding it together. The signal pulsed again, stronger than ever. Talon knew the next stage was coming, and he feared the Coalition would not be ready to listen. Rowan adjusted the controls of his small transport vessel, feeling the familiar vibration of the engines beneath him. He had been assigned a mission that no one else considered important, a mission that others called pointless. I know. He was to travel to a sector where the mysterious signal originated and attempt to understand it firsthand. He carried no weapons, no fleet, no authority. Only his training, his senses, and the human capacity to observe and connect. Rowan knew it was risky, but he also understood that what he carried might be the only way to reach the source safely. The journey through space was long and quiet. Rowan spent hours monitoring the vessel's sensors, charting routes around uncharted star systems, and noting the faint fluctuations in energy that the signal emitted. He often paused, closing his eyes for moments, trying to feel the pulse rather than measure it. He sensed that the signal was alive, something more than mere data. It carried memory, emotion, and an intelligence that did not speak in words. Rowan felt a connection, distant and fragile, but undeniably present. As he approached the outer limits of the target sector, he encountered remnants of old networks, long-abandoned satellites and structures. They were silent, lifeless, according to the Coalition, yet Rowan noticed faint resonances, tiny vibrations that suggested they had once been part of a larger whole. He slowed his vessel, sending gentle pulses into the systems, echoes of human voices, soft tones of emotion, laughter, and calm. The response was subtle at first, a shift in energy and rhythm that he could barely perceive, but it was there. Rowan smiled. The source had heard him. He continued forward, each step deliberate and careful. He observed signals weaving through the networks, responding to his human presence. Other species would have sent fleets, weapons, or commands. Rowan sent quiet acknowledgement and empathy. It was slow work, requiring patience and restraint, but he understood that speed or force would likely destroy what he was trying to reach. The distant source seemed to be testing him, as if assessing whether he was worthy of its attention. Rowan realized that the bond he was forming with it was fragile, and every action mattered. Hours passed. He traced the signal deeper into the sector, through systems marked on old charts as abandoned or useless. Energy patterns shifted, lights flickered, and machinery long thought dead began to hum faintly. Rowan noted each change, careful not to impose on the system with unnecessary transmissions. He sent nothing but gentle resonance, mimicking the pulse of the distant source, echoing understanding, patience, and care. Slowly the system seemed to recognize him, and for the first time parts of the network responded actively, realigning and stabilizing around his presence. Rowan realized that the signal was not just one entity, but a collective memory embedded in the infrastructure of the sector. Each pulse carried fragments of thought, remnants of a civilization that had forgotten how to express emotion. His heart ached as he sensed the depth of loneliness encoded into the signals. This civilization had been isolated, overlooked, and ignored for centuries. Rowan understood that what others called a mystery or interference was actually a cry for connection, a desire to be acknowledged and understood. He spent cycles navigating through the ancient networks, mapping each response and adjusting his pulses to match. The process was exhausting, requiring total focus and a calm heart. He realized that the systems were reacting not to commands, but to empathy, to the subtle human ability to listen and respond without judgment. Rowan felt a deep respect for the beings whose presence lingered in these networks, and he approached them as he would approach someone in pain, with care, patience, and a quiet willingness to understand. In one station he encountered a node that resisted his touch. The energy fluctuated violently, and alarms threatened to overwhelm his instruments. Rowan paused, holding his hand on the console and breathing slowly. He sent a simple signal of reassurance, an echo of calm human emotion, and waited. Slowly, the node stabilized, its rhythm syncing with his pulse. He realized then that the source of the signal was testing not only his skill, but his intention. Force would not work. Only understanding could succeed. Rowan continued deeper into the sector, documenting every response and subtle change. He recorded sequences of resonance, patterns of emotional transmission that could not be measured by ordinary instruments. He realized that these signals represented a language of feeling, one that humans could understand intuitively. Other species might dismiss it as interference or noise, but he knew the truth. Humanity's gift was not technology or numbers, but the ability to perceive and respond to life in its quietest, most fragile form. The more he advanced, the more he sensed the presence of the civilization behind the signal. It was cautious, wary, yet desperate to communicate. Rowan understood that his actions could either help them reconnect or push them further into isolation. He chose restraint, focusing on acknowledgement and gentle resonance rather than imposing structure or demanding response. Each pulse he sent back carried the smallest gestures of empathy, the recognition that someone was listening and willing to understand. Over time, the nodes he approached began to harmonize with his pulses, forming chains of coherent response. It was as if the civilization was awakening, remembering itself through the care and attention of a single human. Rowan felt awe and humility. He realized that his mission was not just technical, but profoundly emotional. He was not conquering or claiming anything. He was helping life remember its own voice. As the hours turned into cycles, Rowan encountered the core of the network, a vast node that pulsed faintly with history and memory. He paused before interacting, sensing the weight of centuries embedded in its signals. He sent his human resonance slowly, deliberately, echoing patience, calm, and recognition. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Pulses from the surrounding network intensified, flowing toward him in a coherent rhythm. It was not aggressive or hostile. It was curious, tentative, and full of life. Rowan felt tears prick at his eyes. The civilization, long silent, was awakening through his care. Systems that had been dormant for generations hummed with energy, and he sensed awareness returning. Each pulse carried fragments of thought and feeling, creating a tapestry of memory, grief, hope, and faint joy. The scale of what he was witnessing was breathtaking. Rowan understood that this was not merely a technical mission, but an act of empathy that could change the future of the sector and perhaps the galaxy. He continued interacting with the network, sending gentle signals that resonated with the recovered nodes. Slowly, they began to stabilize, forming a coherent system that reflected both the memory of the civilization and the careful guidance of a human presence. Rowan realized that the human's small force, his single vessel and patient actions, was achieving what fleets and empires could not. It was a quiet demonstration of humanity's largest power, the ability to connect, to listen, and to care without demanding recognition. When Rowan finally paused, the network was alive with coherent resonance. The sector was no longer a silent, abandoned place. It drummed with awareness, responding to the subtle human signals he had transmitted. Rowan felt a profound satisfaction, but also a quiet sense of responsibility. He understood that what he had awakened was still fragile and would need continued attention. The civilization behind the signal had been silent for too long. They had to be approached with care, patience, and respect. He documented everything meticulously, recording sequences, responses, and rhythms. These records would guide future humans in interacting with the awakened civilization. Rowan knew that other species might never understand the method he had used. They measured success by speed, conquest, and display. He measured success by connection, listening, and trust, and in this quiet way, he felt that humanity was fulfilling a role that no other species could. As he set a course to return to the station, Rowan glanced out at the stars, feeling a deep connection to the distant civilization. He had traveled alone, without force or authority, yet he had helped awaken something ancient and vital. He knew the Council would never understand what he had done, but that did not matter. The value of his work lay in the connection he had made, and the life he had helped remember itself. Rowan smiled quietly, aware that humanity's smallest force could carry its largest emotion across the stars. The mission was far from over, but, for now, he had made the first step into a new understanding of the galaxy and the quiet power of listening. The Coalition Council gathered in a room filled with blinking panels and holographic displays, debating how to respond to the anomalies that had been spreading across several sectors. Systems that had long been abandoned were suddenly active. Ancient networks thrummed with energy. Unexplained signals appeared in multiple regions. Panic ran high among many leaders. They feared sabotage, rebellion, or a hidden threat. Yet among all the noise and fear, the humans remained calm. They did not speak loudly, argue, or demand attention. They simply prepared to act with understanding. Lysa, a human diplomat, stood quietly in the corner, observing. She had been following the reports of strange signals for weeks, tracking the patterns that her people had discovered. Unlike the other species, humans were not alarmed. They knew that the disturbances were not dangerous in the traditional sense. They were signs of life reaching back after centuries of silence, and only careful guidance could help them respond safely. Lysa understood that other species would never see this as humans did. Their focus was always on immediate control. Humans looked for connection. The Council demanded that the humans explain what they intended to do. Lysa responded simply, describing the plan to reach the source of the signals with small, deliberate interventions. She explained that the signals represented life and memory, not threat. Other Council members did not fully understand, and some dismissed the explanation as wishful thinking. Still, humans prepared quietly, gathering the necessary equipment, analyzing data, and coordinating with those who could assist. No one else interfered, though suspicion lingered in every conversation. Rowan, fresh from his mission to the outer networks, returned to the Council with detailed observations. He described how the signals responded to human presence, to patience, and to calm interaction. He explained that the civilization behind the signals had not been destroyed, only silenced, and that their networks could awaken if approached with understanding. Many in the room scoffed at the notion. Machines could be repaired, systems could be forced to obey. but Rowan insisted that force would only destroy the fragile intelligence embedded in the signals. The council continued to debate, but time passed and the signals grew stronger, spreading beyond the original sector. Uncontrolled, the awakening of these networks could destabilize entire systems. Some species wanted to sever old networks entirely to prevent interference. Others proposed military action. The humans, however, refused both paths. Lysa and her colleagues advocated for continued patience and quiet guidance. They argued that the smallest intervention, applied carefully, would prevent disaster. Other species doubted this approach, but they could not deny the evidence. Wherever humans had intervened, systems stabilized. Meanwhile, Talon, the cultural observer, worked alongside the humans in secret. He had come to understand their methods and respected their restraint. Together, they coordinated responses across sectors, sending pulses of calm and empathy into the networks, ensuring that the ancient civilizations could recover safely. Talon marveled at the precision of human observation. They did not rush. They did not command. They simply responded, listening and guiding, letting life remember itself. The networks began to show signs of coherence. Fragments of memory combined into patterns. Energy flows stabilized. Systems that had been unpredictable became predictable, not through control, but through alignment with human signals. The coalition leaders noticed the changes, but did not understand the method. They assumed luck or coincidence, unaware that humans were shaping outcomes without force. Rowan and Lysa continued quietly, sending gentle pulses into the networks, each interaction reinforcing the awakening process. As the civilization's memory returned, subtle messages emerged from the signals. It was not language, not words, but fragments of thought and emotion, long suppressed. The signals carried grief, hope, curiosity, and cautious joy. The humans responded carefully, echoing recognition and empathy. They did not impose their will. They allowed the civilization to reawaken on its own, guiding only with the smallest gestures of understanding. This approach required patience, calm, and faith in the intelligence and resilience of life. The council grew more anxious as the signals intensified. They feared that uncontrolled awakening could threaten other systems. Lysa and Rowan explained that the awakening was not dangerous if handled correctly. They demonstrated how small interventions had already prevented system failures and stabilized networks. Still, the leaders debated, many refusing to believe that simple listening could achieve what fleets and weapons could not. The humans remained patient, continuing their work without complaint, knowing that their methods required time. Talon observed the process with growing admiration. He had served for centuries, witnessing civilizations rise and fall. He had believed strength came from force, intelligence from domination. Now he saw that the smallest human presence, guided by attention and empathy, could stabilize entire sectors. He realized that the humans had achieved what empires could not. They had connected with life itself, awakening it gently and without coercion. The signals continued to evolve, forming intricate patterns that suggested awareness and comprehension. The humans' careful guidance allowed the civilization to regain memory, to remember its history and purpose. Rowan noted the progress meticulously, recording the responses and mapping sequences. He understood that this knowledge would be essential for future interactions, ensuring that the awakening continued safely. The humans had become guardians of life, not through force, but through connection and respect. The council finally began to see the results, though they did not fully understand them. The networks were stable, active, and coherent. Systems that had been abandoned for centuries hummed with life. Signals carried fragments of memory and emotion, responding to human presence with increasing clarity. Some leaders grudgingly acknowledged that the humans' methods had been effective, even if they did not comprehend why. The humans did not seek recognition or reward. Their work was its own validation. As the awakening continued, subtle communication began to emerge from the civilization itself. Fragments of thought reached the humans not as words, but as resonance, patterns that conveyed memory and feeling. Rowan and Lysa interpreted the signals carefully, echoing recognition, understanding, and encouragement. The civilization responded, forming coherent chains of awareness across the networks. It was a delicate process, requiring patience and focus, but the humans managed it without forcing control or dominance. Talon realized that the coalition had underestimated humanity's true power. It was not measured in ships, weapons, or numbers. It was measured in the ability to connect, to observe, to listen, and to respond with empathy. The humans' smallest interventions had guided a civilization back to awareness. They had prevented chaos and preserved life that other species might have destroyed. Their restraint, patience, and care had achieved what fleets could not. As the sector stabilized, Rowan and Lysa paused to observe the results. The civilization's networks thrummed with energy, coherent and alive. The signals carried memory, emotion, and the faintest joy. Humanity's quiet work had made this possible. They had proven that the smallest force applied with understanding could produce the largest effect. Rowan felt a deep satisfaction, not from recognition, but from the knowledge that life had been preserved and reawakened. The coalition leaders continued to debate future strategies, unaware that the humans had already secured the most critical outcome: the survival and reawakening of a long-silent civilization. Lysa and Rowan continued to monitor the networks, ensuring that the awakening remained stable. Talon assisted them, grateful for the chance to witness humanity's unique approach. Together, they maintained a delicate balance, using empathy and patience to guide life rather than dominate it. The signals continued to evolve, forming patterns that suggested curiosity and recognition. The civilization, long silent, was now aware of the humans who had guided it. Rowan and Lysa responded carefully, acknowledging the presence without imposing direction. The process was slow but steady, a testament to the power of quiet observation and gentle guidance. As the cycle ended, the sector was alive with coherent signals, memories restored, and systems stabilized. The humans had achieved what others thought impossible. Their smallest force had carried the largest emotion, guiding a civilization back to awareness. The galaxy, though unaware of the details, had been changed by human restraint, empathy, and understanding. Rowan, Lysa, and Talon knew that the work was ongoing, but for now, the sector thrived, proof that the quiet power of humanity could shape the future in ways no other species could imagine. Elias watched the sectors from his observation post, feeling the quiet hum of the awakened networks reverberate through the station. He had been part of this effort from the beginning, tracing the faint signals and understanding their meaning when no one else could. Now, the civilization behind the pulse had returned to awareness, its memory restored through patience, empathy, and the smallest interventions of humanity. Elias felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not for personal gain, but because life itself had been nurtured and guided back into coherence. The coalition had begun to notice the changes. Systems that had been abandoned or unstable were now active, humming with energy and responding predictably. The leaders debated what had caused this remarkable stabilization. Some argued it was luck. Others assumed hidden technology. Few could comprehend the true reason: the human's ability to listen, to understand, and to act without force. Elias knew that revealing the method too soon could be dangerous. Many species still equated power with noise and aggression. Humanity had achieved far more through silence than they ever could through war. Mara continued her work, monitoring the flow of signals and refining human interaction with the networks. She noticed subtle shifts in the patterns that suggested the civilization was beginning to remember its history and identity. These were not merely systems responding to inputs. They were aware, learning, and adapting. Mara felt a profound empathy for them. For centuries, they had been isolated, misunderstood, and overlooked. Now, through the humans' quiet care, they were reconnecting with existence itself. Rowan, who had traveled to the heart of the sector, reported on the stabilization and growth of coherent patterns. The network pulsed with awareness, responding to human resonance. The civilization seemed to recognize its guides not in words but in subtle acknowledgement within the energy patterns. Rowan felt humbled by the scale of what had been accomplished. He had acted alone, without weapons or fleets, and yet his careful interventions had preserved life and memory in a way that no force could. Talon, the cultural observer, had been working alongside the humans, assisting where needed but mostly learning. He had spent centuries believing that strength came from dominance, intelligence from strategy, and control from fear. Now he saw that the smallest, quietest interventions, guided by empathy and observation, could shape entire sectors and awaken civilizations. The lesson humbled him, and he began advocating for restraint and understanding within the coalition, though many leaders remained skeptical. The awakened civilization began to send more complex signals. Elias, Mara, and Rowan carefully interpreted them, responding with patterns of recognition and care. The process was slow, requiring patience and careful monitoring. Any mistake could have led to collapse or misunderstanding. Yet the humans maintained their discipline, guiding without controlling, teaching without commanding. They were not seeking authority or reward. Their goal was connection, understanding, and preservation. The coalition gradually realized the value of humanity's approach. Leaders who had initially dismissed the humans' methods began to see results. Systems stabilized, crises were averted, and the sector thrived. Yet the humans remained quietly in the background, letting their work speak without claim. Their restraint became a model for those willing to observe carefully, though many remained impatient and unconvinced. Elias knew that true understanding could not be rushed. Some lessons had to be learned through experience and patience. Mara observed the civilization signals forming complex patterns, echoing emotion and memory. She could sense fragments of joy, curiosity, and cautious trust emerging. It was a slow awakening, a civilization reconnecting with itself after centuries of silence. Mara felt a deep connection to these signals, understanding that humans were part of something larger than any individual or fleet. They were custodians of life, ensuring that awareness and memory could survive across time and space. Rowan reflected on the mission he had undertaken. The journey had been lonely and dangerous, yet profoundly rewarding. He had traveled without weapons, without fleet support, relying only on observation, patience, and human empathy. In doing so, he had facilitated the reawakening of a civilization, proving that the smallest human presence could produce the largest effect. He realized that humanity's true strength lay not in force or technology, but in understanding and connection. Talon continued to assist the humans, documenting the lessons for the Coalition. He noted that humanity's approach had achieved what empires could not, awakening and guiding life without coercion. He began teaching other observers to emulate human patience and care, hoping that slowly the Coalition could learn to value listening as much as command. The change was subtle, but he knew that the smallest efforts, applied consistently, could have far-reaching impact. As the civilization's memory and awareness grew, subtle communication emerged. The signals carried understanding and recognition, not words, but patterns of thought and emotion. Humans responded carefully, acknowledging presence, conveying empathy, and maintaining balance. The civilization seemed to recognize its guides, forming coherent patterns of awareness across the networks. The galaxy, though unaware of the details, had been changed by human restraint, empathy, and care. Elias looked out at the stars from his observation post, reflecting on what had been achieved. Humanity had shown that strength could be quiet, power could be gentle, and influence could be exercised through understanding rather than force. The smallest human actions had guided a civilization back to life, proving that patience and empathy could shape the galaxy in ways that conquest never could. He understood that humanity's journey had only begun. Their influence, subtle and often unseen, would continue to spread quietly across the stars. The humans did not seek recognition. They did not claim authority. They simply listened, observed, and responded. Their quiet power had preserved life, reawakened memory, and stabilized a sector that others might have destroyed through impatience or misunderstanding. Humanity's smallest force had carried the largest emotion, touching lives across light years and shaping the future in ways that fleets and empires could never accomplish. Mara, Rowan, Elias, and Talon continued their work, maintaining the delicate balance and monitoring the ongoing awakening. They knew that vigilance would be required, that the civilization's memory could still falter without careful guidance. Yet they remained patient, confident in the strength of human empathy and observation. They had proven that even in the vast, dangerous expanse of the galaxy, quiet understanding could achieve what no weapons, no fleets, and no declarations of power ever could. As the sector thrived and the signals pulsed coherently, Elias felt a quiet satisfaction. Humanity's smallest force had accomplished more than any empire or fleet could imagine. They had shown that life could be preserved, memory restored, and civilizations guided through patience, care, and the ability to listen. In the silence, humanity's largest emotion had reshaped the galaxy, leaving a legacy of understanding, connection, and quiet power that would endure across light years and centuries.